Leaving the body in my field of work, I am constantly asked the same questions over and over. What is it like to die? Is there really an afterlife, and if so, where do we go? Is there any pain? Death is the great unknown. By the time our end draws near, we have developed so many preconceived notions about death and dying through religious and societal beliefs that we have no true understanding of the event. Even though each person's death experience is an individual one, based on my communication with spirits, I can tell you that there are some incredible similarities in making the transition. No matter what factors are present at death, homicide, suicide, explosion, accident, old age, there is one constant that remains. There is no pain when you die. I can never say this enough to people. In fact, it is this absence of pain that confuses many of the newly dead because they do not realize that they have died. 18 ghosts among us, no one ever dies alone. When we pass out of our bodies, deceased loved ones are always there to greet us. We may not have seen these people for many years, but the love bonds we experienced on earth are still very much continued on the other side. Many experience a sense of being surrounded by a brilliant light and being pulled through a tunnel. People describe the light as God, or an all-knowing being. Some feel that the light is pure peace, joy, and love. Instead of a light, some ghosts describe being surrounded by a glorious display of celestial colors like nothing they have ever seen. There is an immediate sense of not being limited to the physical body. The life once lived simply falls away. In its place is an awareness of our newness to life. Finally, when we stand at the doorway to death, there seems to be an immediate altering of time and space. Ghosts are in a timeless, ethereal, transparent dimension. Earth time may be passing, but to a ghost everything is happening now. No pain, why do we escape pain at the very end? Can our spirits be aware of our impending demise and therefore shut down our pain receptors just before we die? It seems as if the universe has indeed provided some sort of shut-off valve in our brains that goes into effect just before we leave our bodies. A person enters a blackout period and loses consciousness and memory. When I ask spirits about the violence of an accident, or about a bullet entering their flesh, or about their death by heart attack, they often respond that they don't remember the impact of the disaster. Instead, leaving the body I-9, their first memories are of their loved ones. In one way or another, each has said, I wish my wife, husband, mother, father, daughter, sister, brother, son knew that I was still alive. That was the case with a young male ghost who appeared in one of my New York workshops. This is a young man about 17 or 18 who gives me the name of Sam and tells me he was crushed in a car. A woman named Debbie jumped out of her seat. Oh, my God, that's Sam. That's my Sam, she shouted. He wants me to tell you not to cry for him. He is saying that he is alive and fine. Debbie held tissues up to her nose as she nodded up and down. He wants you to know that his body flew out of the front window. She nodded again, and I continued. He is telling me to let you and everyone else in the audience know that he was unaware of himself going through the window. He doesn't remember it, and he didn't feel any pain. He saw his body afterward by the tree, and that's when he realized what had happened. Okay, I understand, said Debbie. He says he is with Alfred. Alfred helped him. Debbie continued her crying. Alfred is my father. I knew he would be there for Sam. He is telling me that he blacked out before the impact, and then he saw his grandfather. He thought he was dreaming, but his grandfather told him that he was in an accident. He had Sam look at his body. Then something odd came to me. Sam is showing me his body. I am seeing his left leg in an odd position. Do you know if his left leg was broken or torn from his body? Yes, Debbie replied. It was broken in 7 places along with various ribs. 20 ghosts among us, your son wants me to tell you that when he looked down at his body, he felt that it wasn't his anymore. He didn't feel connected to it. He felt as though he were out of it and didn't need it anymore. He also knows about the rocks you set up at the Itchy Dent scene to commemorate his life. He loved the gesture very much and wants you to know that. Debbie looked shocked. I just did that this week. Can I ask you something? Can Sam hear me? Yes. He is able to hear all of your thoughts all of the time. He knows when you are thinking of him. The reading continued with more details about Sam's passing. Then Debbie's father, Alfred, spoke a little. Alfred is saying, don't worry. Daddy is taking care of everything. Debbie seemed extremely grateful and pleased. Near death experience, those who have touched death and come back to tell about it seem to share a multitude of similarities. Although these people come from all walks of life, have different religious beliefs, and vary in age from children to seniors, they tell a variation of the same story. A sensation of floating above one's body and seeing the surrounding area, pleasant feelings of calmness and overwhelming peace, moving through a tunnel or narrow passageway of light, being greeted by deceased relatives, encounters with an angel, a being of light, or a religious figure leaving the body, experiencing a life review, reaching a border or boundary that one cannot cross finally, a feeling of rapidly moving back into one's body, often with great reluctance to although every person's situation is different. All of them agree that their lives have been profoundly changed by their near death experience. Most come to understand their life's purpose, and many share insights about the lessons they have had to learn. In fact, they are downright adamant that if it had not been for the near death experience, they would be living a very different life. A woman at one of my workshops told me that she was always afraid to try something new. When she had a heart attack at the age of 60 and went through the tunnel toward the light, she was met by her nephew, who had committed suicide because of his schizophrenia. He looked so calm and happy. It had been a long time since I had seen him at peace. Her nephew told her that she should try to live her life more spontaneously, and then he disappeared. That experience changed me. If my nephew, who had suffered so much in his life, came to tell me to live life more fully, I decided that I would do just that. It was my way of showing him that he was my inspiration. Since that time, I have traveled more and have had friends stay over at my home whenever they are in town, both things I was afraid of doing. My life is more enjoyable because I have seen death and I've decided to live. My near death experience, since people had often shared their near death experiences with me, I was particularly curious. I wondered if their reference points 22 ghosts among you tilde about the afterlife were the same as the ones I had received from the spirit world. On December 10, 2006, I got my answer. The holiday season was in full swing. While people circled around parking lots and spilled into shopping malls in search of the perfect whatever for whomever, I stood on my deck, cup of coffee in hand, and gazed at the panoramic view of the glistening blue Pacific Ocean before me. I felt blessed just to be alive. Regrettably, the blaring ring of the telephone interrupted my reverie. It was my manager, Andrew Lear. He had made an appointment for me in LA with the head of a radio station about doing my own radio show. Reluctant to leave my peaceful surroundings, I waved goodbye to the billowy clouds and rushed inside to take a shower. I had just enough time to make it to LA by lunch, if I was lucky. As I crawled my way up the 405 freeway in the middle of a beautiful morning, I fantasized about how great it would be when we could think about a place and be there without having to deal with any type of traffic. By the time I finally reached my destination, it was past lunchtime, and I was starving. I pulled into the first strip center I could find and headed for the nearest sandwich shop. My meeting was to start in 5 minutes, so I stood next to my car and wolfed down my turkey, lettuce, and tomato sandwich as quickly as I could. Fortunately, my meeting went well, even though my stomach suffered from the after effects of my lunch. I happily agreed to create a pilot of an on-air, live audience demonstration of Talking to the Dead. After the meeting ended, I headed to the parking lot, not looking forward to the long, tiresome return trip to Orange County. Fortunately, my friend Victoria Ricano called and invited me to dinner. "I'm so glad you called," I said to Victoria. The thought of another 2.5 hours in the car. The two of us met for dinner in Beverly Hills at Wolfgang Puck's trendy new restaurant, Cut. Victoria and I had struck up leaving the Body 23A friendship while shooting my 5-minute segments for Entertainment Tonight's The Insider show. We both were in the mood for steak, so we ordered identical dinners topped off by a delicious red wine. After dinner, I headed for my part-time apartment across from CBS Studios. It was my home away from home when The Ghost Whisperer was in production. In the middle of the night, I was unexpectedly awakened by an intense ache in my stomach and had just enough time to make it to the bathroom. The dinner I had so enjoyed just a few hours before stared back at me from the bathroom sink. It had to be a reaction to the wine, I thought, as I climbed back into bed and tried to go back to sleep. However, it was not meant to be. For the next several hours, I was in and out of the bathroom until I was too tired to move. By 6 in the morning, I had decided that I would feel better if I was in my own home, snug in my own bed. With all the strength I could muster, I got dressed and got on the road again. I thought my nightmare would soon come to an end when I reached the safety of my home. However, halfway there, the traffic on the freeway came to a dead stop. All I could see was an unending sea of red tail lights. Several hours and a dozen restroom stops later, I exited the freeway and finally reached my destination. I immediately phoned my Los Angeles doctor, who also happened to be a friend, and told her my problem. In her matter-of-fact tone, she said, "Honey, you have food poisoning. Come into the office, and I'll give you something for it." "No, I can't," I practically screamed. "I'm already back home in Laguna. I can't even hold my head up." I am sure that those of you who have had the unfortunate experience of food poisoning can empathize with my outburst. Stay in bed and drink plenty of fluids and get some Gatorade. I'll call in a prescription for an anti-nausea medication. Do you think I should go to the emergency room? 24 ghosts among us, I don't think it's necessary. They would probably give you the same medication. Just drink fluids and take the medication. Don't worry, you'll feel better soon. I'll check with you in the morning. I hung up and suddenly thought of my dinner companion, Victoria. I called her to see if she was okay. I feel fine, she said with a sympathetic tone in her voice. Did you have anything else to eat yesterday? Suddenly I zeroed in on my sandwich. Yes, I shouted. It must have been the sandwich. It could have been unwashed lettuce, Victoria suggested. I hope you feel better. Several hours later, my good friend Brian came over to take care of me. The anti-nausea medicine didn't seem to be working, so I decided to give my doctor another call. It's a bad case of food poisoning. Just keep drinking fluids. By 11 o'clock that evening, I was weaker than ever from vomiting all night long. No matter what, I had to get to the hospital. I managed to get up off the couch and walk into the bathroom. The last thing I remember seeing was the bathroom sink. Suddenly I felt that I was floating out of my body. I felt connected to my body, but not necessarily in it. At first, I could see the top of my head, and the next thing I knew I could see my body on the bathroom floor. A rush of thoughts and emotions flooded through me, and I felt as if I were dying. The most vivid memory was of how much better I felt. No more pain, no more vomiting. Before I knew it, a luminous, golden light seemed to fill the space around me. I could hear someone say to me, dying is easy. Living is hard. Instantly, I was aware of my dead cousin Pat. Pat was my favorite and closest cousin growing up, and we used to spend hours talking about life after death and the idea of reincarnation. In a way, she was the first person I ever spoke to about spiritual matters, and we both shared a mistrust for CA leaving the body 25 Catholicism. Pat died when I was 19, I was heartbroken. I had never seen her as a ghost until that moment. She stared at me with her smiling eyes. She looked so young and pretty in her blue-green satin top. Pat whispered, "Don't worry, it will be all over soon." I mentally asked her, "Do you mean over? Or just over?" At that point, Pat disappeared, and I was aware of my father's presence. He stood in the distance, wearing a brown sweater. He too appeared to be a younger version of himself. Suddenly I heard a swooshing sound and Brian's voice. "James, wake up. Are you okay?" I opened my eyes and looked around. I felt calm, yet at a loss for words. Then I said, "Dying is easy. Living is hard." "Okay, I'm calling 911, Brian said without missing a beat. By the time I got to the ER, I had been in and out of consciousness several times. I was told that I had lost 5 pints of fluid and blood and needed a blood transfusion. All that vomiting had caused a tear in my esophagus, I was hemorrhaging internally, and I had E. coli poisoning from the food I had eaten. To say the least, I was glad to be alive because I knew I still had work to do. Having my own near-death experience cemented my faith in my spiritual communication. Going through the dying experience showed me that there was nothing else left to be afraid of. Coma. I am often asked, can people in comas hear us? Even when an individual appears to be physically unresponsive or in a vegetative state, he or she may not be completely unaware of what is happening. That person may also not be aware all the time, because I also believe there are various degrees of a coma state of mind. However, consciousness is always aware of what's going on. Ghosts among us. There are many levels of consciousness: waking consciousness, 2 automatic consciousness, which keeps our blood flowing, cells dividing, and so forth, and 3 higher consciousness, which occurs in deep relaxation, meditation, prayer, dreaming, and daydreaming. I believe that my communication with ghosts is part of this higher consciousness. Simply put, consciousness is awareness of all of our internal and external experiences. To me, it is the all. Consciousness is not confined to the body, it is a part of the mind, and the mind is a part of the soul. At the time of death, the soul, which is eternal and contains experiences from eons of lifetimes, moves on. My father was bedridden in a hospital for the last 2 weeks of his life. In a coma, he was hooked up to machines, respirators, and IVs. It was a situation that he would never have wanted. On his final night, his doctors called and told my family that Dad did not have much longer to live. When we arrived at the hospital, we filed into his room, one by one, to say our goodbyes. I was the last one. Throughout that last 2-week period, I had noticed his dead parents and my deceased mother lingering in his room. That particular night, my mother seemed quite impatient. She kept saying, "Hurry up and say your goodbyes already. We want him with us." My brother and sisters were standing around watching my father in his last moments of life. I approached his bed, bent down, and whispered in his ear, "It's time for you to go home. Go toward the brilliant light that you see." I heard him respond to me from about 2 feet above my head, as if he were watching the whole thing. I knew that he would be completely aware of what was happening because he knew by then that it was time for him to go. He spoke telepathically to me in a very clear and very firm tone, and he asked me to grant his final wish. "I just don't want your kids fighting when I leave." I promised, "We won't, Dad," and kissed him on his head. "Enjoy your journey home." Leaving the body 27 when we left the room, I repeated Dad's words to my siblings. Everyone chuckled. My brother-in-law, Jay, jokingly added, I guess we'd better change our phone numbers then. Within 5 minutes of our last goodbyes, Dad died. The doctor seemed surprised, he had given Dad at least another day or so. I turned to the DC tour and told him, he wanted to leave. His whole family was waiting for him. The doctor grinned, turned, and walked away. Ghosts attend their funerals after the dead leave their physical body and realize that they are no longer attached to their body, they move into the membrane between Earth and the next dimension closest to Earth. At this time, ghosts make up their mind whether they want to remain close to the Earth as earthbound ghosts or cross into the light. During this window of opportunity, ghosts usually attend their funeral to see how they are being laid out, who shows up, the various preparations, and so on. I have heard many odd remarks by ghosts while attending their funeral. Why did they put that dress on me? Who picked those flowers for my casket? I want to be at a bronze urn, not a wooden box. Often I have heard ghosts say that they do not like having an open casket. Some male ghosts have communicated that they do not like being made up for their funeral. Many a ghost has caused plenty of havoc at his or her funeral in order to help the loved ones get it right. Then there are those who don't give a second thought to the details of their funeral and are very surprised by all the fuss being made over them. When my father died, my siblings and I scoured the attic for old photographs to set around the funeral parlor for his wake. He must have been quite impressed because, as I was catching up with an old school chum after the memorial service, I felt a cold breeze behind me. It was Dad. He whispered in my ear, where did 28 ghosts among us you find all those old photos of me? I don't even remember taking them. Then he added, thanks for putting my teeth back in. I look pretty good. It is also common for ghosts to attend their autopsy. No longer attached to their physical body, they want to see how they died or what caused their death. If they died of a certain disease, they may want to see how the disease killed them. To us, these ideas may seem morbid, but that is because we are still mentally attached to our bodies. I think the HBO series 6 Feet Under perfectly captures the life of the newly dead. The dead see their bodies as old, worn out coats that they no longer need. I cannot tell you how many times I have had a spirit say to a loved one, why do you go to the grave and stare at the dirt? I'm not in there. For years, my cousin Rath, sister Lynn, Aunt Cassie, and I would talk about life after death. It seemed that the work I was doing fascinated them. We would often share memories of our dead relatives. I come from a big Irish family on my mother's side, and I spent a lot of time in my childhood attending funerals. Seeing dead bodies in coffins was quite common to me. I remember how much Aunt Cassie would obsess over relatives who had passed, always remembering their death anniversaries, keeping their obituaries and the funeral sermons pasted in a scrapbook. We would often joke together over the telephone. She used to say to me, if there's an afterlife, I am going to make sure to scare the bugaboos out of you. Aunt Cassie passed away in her late 80s. She literally sat down in her living room chair and died. Because she was the last of her generation to leave, all of her nieces and nephews showed up for her funeral. It was a wake like no other. As I sat with my back against a wall, talking to my sister Lynn and cousin Rath, I joked, you know, Cassie will have to make an appearance. Suddenly all three of us felt an icy cold chill run through our veins. We looked at each other in amazement. I glanced upward and saw Aunt Cassie standing there with my mother and the rest of leaving the body 29 my aunts and uncles. Cassie was pointing at us and laughing. She wore a white dress with a green print. She looked stunningly young, and quite different from the stiff body laid out in the coffin. I heard her saying to me, what? Did you think I would miss my own funeral? I shared my vision with Lynn and Rath. My cousin looked at me and remarked, you are so weird. The three of us shared a laugh. We were happy that Cassie was finally back home with the family she had missed so much and had wanted to be with for such a long time. After the funeral, what's next for ghosts? It depends on a number of factors. Was death the result of a prolonged illness? Did the person have strong religious beliefs? Was the person afraid of dying? Was the person in an accident or murdered? Was the person a child? Because our consciousness doesn't die at death, we carry our mindset of thoughts and beliefs with us to the other side. As in life, so in death. When we cross over into the other dimensions, we continue to create experiences through our thoughts, the same way we did in life. Entering the light, the newly dead are usually drawn to a brilliant white light. What exactly is this white light, and why do most sense it at the time of death? Scientifically, when all colors come together as one, they become white. I believe that this white light is at one end of the dimensional spectrum and blends all colors of the light spectrum. I believe that this end of colors is the threshold to another dimension, and it's interesting that the song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, seems to refer to it exactly. The other side of the rainbow is the end of the spectrum of color as we know it. Perhaps that is why this song strikes a chord with so many people and is still so popular more than a half century after it was written. 30 Ghosts Among Us. When I was a child, I had a vision of this white light and thought of it as the hand of God. It was a feeling of joy and pure unconditional love. It seems to be the same for those who have had near death experiences. They are drawn to this luminous light and feel utter peace as they go toward it. Like me, some have characterized the light as God, while others, with no particular philosophy, have called it the all knowing, or home. Suffice it to say that the white light is indeed a doorway or porthole, and once you go through it, you have entered the spiritual dimensions and arrived home. Not once when doing my work have spirits ever said to me that they wish they could come back to earth and live again. The spirits with whom I communicate are usually thrilled that they are in the light and would want it no other way. Their biggest regrets have to do with not realizing the truth about life when they were alive on earth. They often comment that, had they known, their lives would have been very different. Blue Thunder. I find it fascinating to listen to various ghosts discuss how they experience the other side. For one thing, they seem to have an overwhelming sense of being free. When they realize they have passed over, they immediately go to their grieving family members and attempt to tell them that there is no need to be sad because they are still very much alive. Also, it seems that they enter a world that perfectly fits their level of spiritual understanding. A couple of years ago, a dear friend called and asked if I could see Candy, a young woman whom she thought was at her breaking point. You are her last resort, James. I agreed to see her. When Candy arrived for her appointment, I ushered her into my living room. Candy had long, blonde hair that framed her, leaving the body 31 beautiful high cheekbones and green eyes. She seemed anxious, so I offered to get her a glass of water. Take some deep breaths and relax, I suggested as I left the room. Returning with the water, I assured Candy, you're safe here. As she sat on a chair catching her breath, I explained how the process of spirit communication worked and began a brief meditation in order to relax her and release any nervousness. In the middle of the meditation, I saw two men standing behind her, one young and one older. There's an older gentleman behind you. I feel it is a father figure. He is mentioning something about being from Scotland and has a slight Scottish accent. He has a black and white sheepdog named Sharky. Candy seemed to be in shock and glared at me, desperately trying to understand how I could know such things. Then she broke down and wept. Yes, that is my father, Alex. He was Scottish and very proud of his heritage. Sharky was our family dog, whom he loved even more than us kids. He says to give love to your mom. Candy said through tearful eyes, Mom misses Dad very much. Even though this was an amazing connection, I still felt there was something more important coming. I'm picking up a young man with your father who keeps on talking about Blue Thunder. Your father wants you to know that he helped this young man cross Tildagwar. Candy was dumbfounded and sobbed even more. He says his name is David, I said. He is dressed all in white and is showing me a wedding ceremony. He seems to be somewhere tropical like Hawaii. Then it dawned on me. I looked at Candy and said, this is your fiancé, isn't it? 32 ghosts among us, yes. I feel that David is extremely sorry for being so pushy about Blue Thunder. Does that make sense? Candy nodded her understanding. Then, in my mind's eye, I saw a car with the number 64 on its side spinning around in flames. Candy was amazed at my revelation. David was a professional race car driver. We were supposed to go to Hawaii and get married and then go around the world for our honeymoon. David liked meeting new people and experiencing different cultures. He insisted on finishing one more race before Hawaii. He was fine until the final lap, when he lost control, and his car, Blue Thunder, number 64, exploded into flames, and he died. I was stunned. Both of us sat silently, letting it all sink in. Then I resumed my communication with David. He tells me July is a special month. We were going to get married in July. Are you planning on still going? He is telling me that you and he had been to Hawaii to pick out a special place. Yes, I'm thinking of going back there to scatter his ashes. Suddenly I was transfixed as David took control of my thoughts and vision. He shows me that he was unaware of the accident. He remembers looking up at the crowd and seeing your face. Next to you, he saw your dead dad, and the next thing he knew he was out of the car, although he doesn't remember leaving it. Your father told him he had a bad accident. He is saying he couldn't believe it. He thought it was all a nightmare. So he went to the wreckage to witness his remains. Then he went to you and tried to tell you that he wasn't dead and that he was standing right next to you, but you couldn't hear him. After a while, your father took him by the shoulder. At that point, he knew that everything was going to be alright. He became aware of a beautiful green field surrounded by mountains. He saw his grandparents, leaving the body 33 Liebenbert, whom he hadn't seen since his childhood, coming to greet him along with other people. He says he hadn't thought of these people in years. A friend, Tom, also came to see him. Tom had died in some kind of a military uprising. He is now taking me to an incredible lake surrounded by tropical trees, ginger plants, and gardenias. Candy took in the entire picture. He says that heaven is more than he ever imagined it to be. It all seems so natural. He was shocked because he never really thought about life after death, but he is very happy to know it exists. Candy told me, that place you're describing sounds exactly like the place where we were going to get married. He'll be there waiting for you. David kept talking. He says he thinks he had to go the time he did in order for various events to occur in the future. He is also telling me that he is aware that there are other places to visit in the spirit world. It is not like heaven as one would think. It seems that there are different spheres where people who think alike reside. He is very excited to explore heaven. He is saying, it is all for the good. He thinks this may be hard for you to understand. He wants you to know he is telling the truth. One day you will hold his hand again, and you'll be together forever. Insights from the spirit world. I have gathered a lot of information over the years from my communication with spirits who have crossed over into the light. Here are further insights about life after death. No one ever dies alone. No matter what, there are always friends, family members, and others there to greet you. Often there are spirits from many lifetimes ago to meet here as well. Your soul recognizes all whom you have known. 34 ghosts among us in the spirit world. There is no time as we know it. Past and future do not exist. All time is now. When you arrive on the other side, you have a life review. You witness and actively experience important moments in your recent life. You become aware of the soul lessons that you had to learn. Only you are the judge of yourself. Only you will know if you learned the lesson or not. No one else judges you. If you hurt someone on earth, you experience that exact same hurt. Only you can forgive yourself for the pain that you caused another soul, and only you can forgive yourself for the pain you caused yourself. You see clearly the importance of your life and its effect on others. You become aware of yourself on a soul level and understand the vastness of a multidimensional universe. Your consciousness expands. You understand how previous lifetimes influenced your judgment of the life you just lived. You realize that the spirit world is made up of thousands of levels and that spirits gravitate to particular levels depending on their soul's evolution. You know that universal law rules everything, and that like always attracts like. You learn that there are lower, darker levels for unevolved souls and those who have not yet learned to appreciate their lives or the lives of others. You realize that life never ends. Life continues forever in different forms and in different dimensions. Leaving the body. 35. Let me just say that leaving your body at death is as natural as being born. It's like moving, only without all the bother of packing. You are moving to a new neighborhood, and it may take some getting used to, but you will be the same you when you arrive. With this in mind, you might be curious about what it means to become a ghost, what you will look and feel like, and where you will end up when you leave your body.